Video games by their design are challenging, perhaps a bit too challenging sometimes. That's where cheat codes come in, a password or a series of inputs that give determined players a leg up. One such code was so memorable that it's practically synonymous with the concept of cheats. You're probably reciting it in your head right now. Yes, we'll be talking about the ever-versatile Konami code on this week's inexplicable episode of Clarissa Explains It All.
Up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, start. Just because we use cheats doesn't mean we're not smart.
If you ever spent any quality time with the Nintendo Entertainment System, you'll agree that a great many of their games were hard. Not just merely challenging, but slap in the head, kick to the groin, lemon juice on your paper cut, mind-blowingly difficult. Though many people, myself included, argue that that's what made them so fun and memorable in the first place. It should come as no surprise to anyone that the games that had you and your friends banging your head against the wall in frustration were also quite daunting to the people who made them. Except where your failures were a minor trivial obstacle in the grand scheme of things, for them, their inability to best their own creations meant hundreds of wasted hours during the testing phase. Kazuhisa Hashimoto was one such programmer. He was working on the NES port of the 1985 game Gradius and found himself struggling with the game's difficulty during playtesting. Success in this game depends highly on having a strong assortment of weapon and defensive upgrades, which you purchase by collecting power capsules. Amassing enough to fully upgrade your ship was a small chore, but it was well worth it considering it drastically alters the chance of survival in your favor. And without failure, your beefed up Vic Viper gets far enough only to find itself on the wrong end of an enemy. Enjoy starting your current battle over, except this time with a measly little pea shooter and a depressing lack of available capsules. Hashimoto, perhaps fearing his patience wearing thin, or the doom of a fast-approaching deadline to have the game ready for shipment, added a quick bit of code to recognize a simple, rhythmic series of commands while the game is paused. Once entered, the Vic Viper would find itself fully loaded with a complete array of weapons and options without the hassle of collecting and spending capsules. And whether the code was left in by accident or retained so Konami had something to contribute to the Nintendo Fun Club newsletter is up for debate. Nonetheless, old school gamers' favorite cheat code was born.
Up, up, down, down, left, right. I don't remember the rest.
That series of commands, in case you don't know by now, is up, down, left, right, B, and A. No, start is not officially part of the code. It often gets added at the end when read aloud, since pressing start is typically required to get the code to work its magic, such as unpausing or starting a game. It's entirely possible to enter other commands ahead of start, such as select should you need to choose an option. For example, a two-player game in Contra. Like Gradius, Contra was a modest success in the arcades, and when it was ported to the NES/Famicom in 1988, it became one of the console's most memorable titles. The gameplay was successfully captured on the modest Nintendo hardware, and Konami had tailored the game to work within the console's limitations in such a way that it's actually more fleshed out than its arcade counterpart. Plus, the cooperative element, still fairly novel at the time, solidified many a friendship. That is, until one player would steal lives from the other's stockpile. And also like Gradius, Contra was tough. Your characters were quite the fragile little acrobats, with even the slightest scrape from an enemy or projectile sending lance or bill tumbling in defeat. And there was no shortage of things on the screen that wanted you dead. Once again, the Konami code was added to the game. When inputted during the title screen, grateful players were gifted with a stockpile of 30 men instead of the usual 3. Getting to the end of the game was suddenly in the reach of casual players. The best thing about Contra's implementation of the Konami code, which was sometimes referred to as the 30-man code or Contra code in more laid-back conversation, was that it did not ruin the challenge. If anything, it just softened the punishment for failure a little bit. But even with the generous allotment provided by the code, it was still quite possible for inexperienced players to blow through the 2.5 dozen tries fairly quickly before having to call upon their strictly limited cache of continues. With the release of Life Force, a spin-off of Gradius, gamers were pleasantly surprised to learn that the code that made difficulty an easier pill to swallow was present in the game, ready to grant 30 ships to help clumsy pilots achieve success. However, Super C, the port of the arcade sequel Super Contra, renamed for the NES due to the Iran-Contra scandal permeating the TeeVee airwaves around this time, bucked the trend by changing up the code. Pressing right, left, down, up, A, B, then starting your game will give you only 10 lives this time. No matter, the game's a little more forgiving, and that should be plenty. The easily remembered code found its way into a few other games by Konami, or its shell subsidiary Ultra. Sometimes it was slightly altered. Their port of Gradius, as an example, required players to enter the code backwards to be granted 30 lives. Even a few non-Konami games got into the act.
When you decide to step up to this kind of power, this kind of challenge, this kind of flying.
On August 23, 1991, Nintendo would release their highly anticipated Super NES to North American store shelves. Alongside its launch was a handful of strong titles, including Konami's Gradius 3. I'm sure many players, remembering the original game, gave the old code a try. Pause the game, up, down, left, right, B, A, unpause. Well, it would seem Konami was done helping you out, poor player. Except that's not the case. Konami just decided to be a little sneaky. You have to replace the left and right portions of the sequence with the appropriate shoulder buttons. It's ironic, but what's often called the Contra code is once again missing from a Contra game. The North American and PAL versions of Contra 3, The Alien Wars, had no codes to speak of, Konami or otherwise. You can adjust your stockpile to up to 7 lives, however, along with the difficulty in the option menu. So no need to stomp your feet on the matter if you need a bit of a helping hand in this demanding game. As video games matured, with a lot more focus on plot and less reliance on limiting players' attempts as an obstacle, classic cheat codes have largely fallen by the wayside. And indeed, where online multiplayer games are involved, any sort of cheating is now seen as an offense that earns you a permanent ban from official servers. Still, the Konami code makes numerous appearances in modern games, with console-specific buttons replicating the B and A whenever applicable. For the curious, try the Konami code in Assassin's Creed 3, Borderlands 2, NBA Jam 2010, the Nintendo 64 version of Winback, and Adventure Time, Hey Ice King, why'd you steal our garbage? That's just scratching the surface. There are plenty of lists on the internet where you can find games that accept the Konami code, either standard or close variations in the same vein. And speaking of the internet, it would seem that many a webmaster with either a nostalgic appreciation for Contra or a willingness to get fired have found a way to sneak the famous Konami code into popular websites. Even Facebook got into the fun up until 2012. As of the date of this video, try the Konami code on Dig, BuzzFeed, and the UK versions of Vogue and GQ. Sadly, some of the more famous uses of the code have long been removed, some due to security risks. And this is why we can't have nice things. Now that we discussed the most famous cheat code, I propose to you a challenge. Grab that game that you used to play growing up with the aid of a cheat code and revisit it. But this time, try playing it straight, without any sort of cheats enabled. Some of these codes, particularly the Konami code as found in Gradius and Contra, are great training wheels. But there's something to be said for the satisfaction you'll feel by tackling a game as it was intended. Even if you don't beat it, you might have a greater appreciation of the challenge. Give it a shot. Or don't. What do I care? This was Dave for TeeVee Games. Like, comment, subscribe, and see you next time. And whether the code was left in by accident or retained so Konami had something to contribute to the Nintendo... I cannot say Nintendo Fun Club newsletter. And whether the code was left... I just said it though, when I was complaining about it.